Saints fans and who-dats from all over the world. It's time for the Bayou Blitz. With your host, Bob Rose.
Good evening, New Orleans Saints fans, fans of the NFL, and fans of the Bayou Blitz. We thank you for having us into your homes and over your airwaves again on a Wednesday night. I am Bob Rose of the Bayou Blitz, and joining me as always, we're just going to start calling him the Nostradamus of Saints News Radio, Mr. Kyle Mosley. How are you tonight, Kyle?
Nostradamus, I could say some other interesting words, but I'm doing well, Bob. How you doing, sir?
I am real good. We're dodging raindrops up here tonight, but that's quite all right. Getting ready for a big game tomorrow night as our Saints wrap up the 2018 preseason in what seems like forever. And just 10 days from tomorrow will be the season opener against the division rival Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Yeah. So I think everybody everywhere has to be excited for that.
Yes, sir. I mean, it's Saints football. We're back into the grind, ready for our chance at the Super Bowl to be able to play in that Origami Stadium in Atlanta. So I'm just ready to go, and I think it's going to be a very exciting season.
I do too. And we are also very excited to have us joining us for the very first time as a special guest. Mr. Emory Hunt of Football Game Plan. How are you tonight, Mr. Hunt?
I'm doing fine. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Well, anytime. We're really excited to have you and get some of your insights on what's been going on with our Saints through the preseason as we get ready for this big time season opener.
Well, look, Bob, Emory is no slouch, of course. He is the GM, CEO, and extraordinaire of Football Game Plan and the visionary. But Emory is also a native New Orleanian. And, Emory is also a part of the Saints News Network family. He's been a special guest on Saints News Radio for many a time. And, I'm just glad he's back to be able to talk with us about Saints football, man. I'm glad to have you back, Em.
I'm glad to be back, man. It's fitting that we meet up again on this show on the 13th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah, definitely. A hurricane that and weather event that really impacted the lives of many in this country, especially in New Orleans as well. But it created dysphoria going across this United States of America as well. But, our prayers are still with a lot of families that have been affected. A lot of people have rebounded, but it's good that we have remembrance, but it's also good to know that people have been able to find their way, some back home, some others have planted roots elsewhere, but all in all, we are resilient people, and we are New Orleans true and true.
Yeah, it's hard to believe it's already been 13 years, but that truly was one of the greatest tragedies in American history. And our hearts and our prayers certainly go out to every single Gulf Coast member that was affected in any way by that tragedy, whether it's the loss of everything that you owned, or the loss or injuries of a family member, or all of the above, whether you were chased away and came back, or chased away and was never able to make it back. But, like Kyle, you pointed out, we know that your hearts and souls will always remain in New Orleans and the Gulf Coast region. And, just the resiliency that all of you and your families have shown over the years, and the support that you all showed for each other, not only at that very moment, but in the years subsequent. Certainly give yourself a pat on the back for that. And God bless you on that day and the days since and the days going forward.
Yeah, definitely. Emory, let me ask you a question, man. Were you already in New York at that time when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans?
No, actually, I was by an old college teammate of mine who I evacuated by him. Him and his family, he lived up in Greenville, Mississippi, so about 80 miles north of Jackson. I was up there from, this day until about September 30th or something like that before I made my way, actually to the middle of October before I made my way up here. So I left his house at, I want to say October the 12th and moved up here on October the 15th.
Wow. Yeah, I still can recall that day watching CNN as well as many other news networks, having my mother, my aunts, uncles, cousins here in the home, and my wife and son was just 6 months at that time. Well, yeah, around a few months old at that time. But it was just incredible sight to see. And it, hey, we're still praying for New Orleans and a lot of people who lost loved ones through Hurricane Katrina as well. So that's not just your property, but when you lose lives, and it's just I'm sorry, guys, but it's just something for us to be able to grant and say thank you, God, that we're here today and we're able to persevere. So anyway, I'm sorry to be emotional about that, but Bob, you did this. Yeah. So anyway, man, let's talk about some Saints.
Our New Orleans Saints threw everybody a bit of a curveball earlier this afternoon. Kyle, I'm sure you were doing the same thing that I was at the time that the news broke, jotting down notes and questions and topics to go over with you, Emory, when all of a sudden the news broke that the New Orleans Saints have a new quarterback. They made a deal this afternoon, a trade with the New York Jets to obtain Teddy Bridgewater. And Saints social media exploded after that. First of all, Kyle, we got to give you props on the air. You sort of called that shot a few weeks ago here on this show when you suggested, you put yourself in the shoes of Sean Payton and Mickey Loomis a little bit and suggested that, hey, maybe the team should take a look at this guy. And sure enough, they did. So the Saints' backup quarterback question for the time being anyway has been answered. They will not have to choose between Tom Savage and Taysom Hill or even J.T. Barrett because Teddy Bridgewater, once he gets himself up to speed on the Saints' offensive game plan, he is going to be the unquestioned number 2 quarterback to Drew Brees. Gentlemen, and doesn't matter who goes first, I'd love to hear your reaction to that.
Go ahead, Em. You're the guest.
Well, I just think it was a great move, quite honestly, because I'm so glad they made the move to get a guy that's a legit starter in this league, a playoff quarterback, a guy that's been a Pro Bowler, and stop giving the fans this false hope that Taysom Hill was good enough to be a backup. Like, Taysom Hill is not good at all. He's a good football player. I like how, you always got to be wary of the quote-unquote fan favorite because that tells me that player is probably not the best player on the team or one of the best players. So I'm glad they got an upgrade at that number 2 spot. I wish they would have given J.T. Barrett a chance to play a lot in the preseason because every time I look up, Taysom Hill is fumbling the ball, turning the ball over, taking sacks. I don't know. Maybe because he can run down on special teams, that's why it's great. But no, he wasn't playing good football. But Bridgewater gives the Saints their quarterback of the future, a guy that they can truly count on to be the next one in line once Drew Brees retires, and it makes the trade up for Davenport so much easier to take and digest because now you've got your quarterback of the future for basically a 3rd-round pick in Teddy Bridgewater.
What's the feel in New York regarding this trade? I know you spend a lot of time with the Giants, but have you heard anything from Jets camp?
I was at the Jets preseason game against the Giants, and it was just obvious that Teddy Bridgewater is a starting quarterback in his league. And it got to the point to probably why the Jets made the move because it was going to be obvious that Bridgewater probably should have started the season, and to avoid having that distraction, what they did was move Bridgewater, and they know people wasn't going to be clamoring for Josh McCown. So they wanted to start Darnold and do so because people will not be calling for his job after, a bad game or two for Josh McCown. They're going to stick with Darnold this entire season. On the flip side, Giants, like you said, I've been with the Giants pretty much all training camp, and Pat Shermer let it be known that he likes Teddy Bridgewater. He said, don't count him out. This was a guy that everybody in the city of Minnesota loved, or the city of Minneapolis loved when he was out there with the Vikings, along with Bridgewater. And so it sounded as if, like, hey, if he came available, he would be a guy that the Giants would definitely target. So that's why it was important for, let's say, a team like the Saints, who had quarterback questions, especially at the backup position, to go in there and make the deal and get the job done, because you had maybe Jacksonville, you probably had Miami. There were a host of teams that could have utilized Teddy Bridgewater this year, but at least the Saints have someone they can count on in the future, so they can stop playing that 2-year, $50 million deal with Drew Brees, seems like every year.
Yeah, good point. You know what struck me as a important move for the New Orleans Saints is that a lot of people take for granted and forget Teddy Bridgewater coming out of college was a number 1 draft pick, right? But not only that, Teddy Bridgewater took his team his second year to the playoffs. As well, this guy was the former offensive rookie of the year. And people kind of forget these accolades, right? You don't play in this National Football League as a professional player and have these type of accolades if you are not effective. Teddy Bridgewater coming out of the University of Louisville, I heard a lot of the talk, especially at that time here in Houston, where the Houston Texans, in my opinion, should have taken him then. They had the opportunity. But Teddy Bridgewater is going to be a very serviceable guy. He doesn't have that pressure that he has to perform this year unless something happens with Drew, right? He doesn't really have that pressure to have something happen next year as well. So right now, Teddy Bridgewater is in a very good position to be able to understand, learn Sean Payton, learn the system, learn that he is given the opportunity and possibly will be given the opportunity to be Drew Brees' heir apparent.
You guys made both of you made such terrific points. And before I jump in, a little bit of background on Teddy Bridgewater to further support what both of you said. He was drafted in 2014 after being a 3-year starter at Louisville. And Minnesota drafted him with their first round pick, the 32nd overall. But like you guys said, coming into the draft, he was projected originally to be a top 5 or a top 10 pick. Now he took a little bit of a tumble. Some questioned his arm strength, especially to make those outside boundary throws. He has since, he does have an NFL arm, just not the strongest arm in the world, and he's worked hard to improve on his footwork since he's come into the league. And he does have quick feet, and something that we know Coach Payton loves in his quarterbacks is their footwork within the pocket. In the first 2 years of Bridgewater's career, he was Offensive Rookie of the Year. He was a playoff quarterback and a Pro Bowl quarterback in his second year in Minnesota. He's thrown for 28 career touchdown passes and almost 65% completion percentage. So even though he doesn't have the strongest arm in the world, he is accurate. And he knows when you watch him break down the defense, he knows what he's looking at, and he can go through his progressions, and he can do so with a lot of poise in the pocket, something we have not seen out of the New Orleans Saints backups this particular preseason. Now, obviously, he suffered that devastating knee injury in 2016, and it took him a little bit of time to work his way back. But when he did so, he was back on the Vikings roster by the end of last season, and then, of course, allowed to leave for the New York Jets in free agency. Now, I think one thing that has a lot of Saints fans in an uproar today is the fact that the Saints did surrender a third-round pick for him. I believe it's 2019, if I'm not mistaken, so next year. And in return, of course, got Bridgewater and a sixth-round pick. And what has a lot of fans in an uproar is that, Bridgewater is only under contract through the end of this year. But the way I look at it is this. I don't think Sean Payton and Mickey Loomis would have made this move if they didn't think that they could have a good chance at renegotiating Bridgewater's contract to maybe extend him a few years beyond this. B, that he wasn't fully recovered, to make sure he was fully recovered from his knee injury. And Lord knows they watched a ton of game film on him throughout the preseason before pulling the trigger on this deal. Bridgewater is only going to be 26 in November. So he is still an up-and-coming quarterback with a lot to learn and an NFL and professional football mind to do so. So I'm anxious to see how he is going to pick up Sean Payton's offense. I wouldn't expect we would see him on the field tomorrow night, guys. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that. But I like the move. I do. Because as you said, Emory, and Kyle and I, of course, know this too, the Saints don't have a first-round draft choice, having used it for Marcus Davenport this year. So the question that has been asked for the last 3 or 4 years, where is Drew Brees' heir apparent coming from? And a lot of us continue to roll our eyes because Brees is continuing to play at a high level. So why worry about that at this point? But that now answers that question, at least for the time being. You have a 26-year-old former first-round draft choice who has played at a Pro Bowl level and is still learning the game, is still improving his game. So why wouldn't you pull the trigger? The proponents of this trade have said, well, now they don't have a first-round draft choice. Now they don't have a third-round draft choice next year. Okay, well, let's look throughout this Saints roster and tell me how many players on there are between the ages of 23 and 25. That, and you gave up a first-round draft choice next year to potentially land a very disruptive presence along your defensive line, and your third-round draft choice to potentially add a quarterback of the future. Guys, they didn't just give these picks away. They may already have them on the roster. That's a bonus.
Right. And I think, Emory, if you can possibly shed some light from afar on how you would have viewed the Saints draft classes of the past 2 seasons and how they can impact the Saints' future going forward, especially if you add a piece like Teddy Bridgewater.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, when you have a good quarterback, it allows you to mask a lot of deficiencies on offense. But the Saints still, to me, have a major need at wide receiver and tight end. I feel like they have to get a little bit more dynamic there outside of Michael Thomas. Everyone else can fill a role. I know they brought in Cameron Meredith via free agency, and they drafted Traquan Smith in the 3rd round. But, I mean, I still think they can get better at that position. Tight end, they definitely can get better. And the fact that they traded up in the 1st round had a lot of people thinking they were going quarterback because you had Lamar Jackson sitting right there on the board, and that would have been a perfect guy to groom behind Drew Brees for 2 years before he becomes a starter. But they went ahead and took Marcus Davenport, so they need Davenport to be Ricky Jackson this year not really to justify, but to justify trading next year's first to get him. He has to be a difference maker. That's the only way it makes a lot of sense.
Good point. The kid played very well coming into his first preseason game, and I'm speaking of Marcus Davenport. He still had some issues from not bending totally, not being able to be explosive off the ball on all of the snaps, but you did see something that you cannot teach: athleticism. You saw that in how he was able to pursue that running back when the running back decided to cut back on that sweep play, and he was able to stop him for a 2-yard gain. But anyway, you make a good point. A lot of the young talent that's on this roster helps the Saints. If they can stay healthy, they can be able to groom them and show that they are going to be impact players for the team in not just 2018 but 19 as well is great. The point of And you brought up a good point about the wide receivers. And I think we can revisit this a little bit later when we talk about the 53-man projections, right? Is that, are we going to have somebody who's going to be able to stretch that field? Can Traquan be that guy, or are we going to see a regression in Ted Ginn again this season? So that's a good point, Emory, but I think we need to revisit that a little bit later in the show. But going back to Teddy Bridgewater, Bob and Emory, I believe that right now he's in a great position. My personal opinion, I would love to see these guys try to work out some in-season contract situation. And again, a lot of people say, well, what if he decides to exit out of his contract and become a free agent again? The Saints can get a compensatory pick. We don't know if it's going to be as high as the third round or fourth round, but we still would get something from this in the long run. So, giving up getting a 6 and giving up a third round is almost averaging like we got a fourth or fifth round pick anyway out of Teddy Bridgewater, in my opinion.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you both bring up a great point about Bridgewater's contract that I had mentioned sort of as well. It would certainly be his right to say, you know what, guys, no, I want to become a free agent at the end of this year. But, Kyle, you brought up this point about Bridgewater's situation a few weeks back when you sort of dropped a hint that that the Saints might go after him. You look around this roster, and the three of us just got done talking about how young and talented it is. You have a 39-year-old starting quarterback, and as much as we would love to see it, he's not going to play forever. Bridgewater may be sitting there as he's getting off his flight in New Orleans after this deal and saying, looking around and saying, this is not a bad situation to be. Granted, I'm not going to be a starter this year. I'm not going to be a starter next year. But if I can hang in there for just a few more years while I continue to develop, I am stepping into a ready-made Super Bowl contender. So that is something that is certainly working in the Saints front office, the favor of the Saints front office. If they do decide to approach Teddy and say, you know what, we want to tear up your existing contract and we want to sign you for a 3-year deal or whatever the case may be. And if he chooses to say, I'm going to test free agency, like you said, Kyle, the Saints would still get a compensatory pick if he left. Probably wouldn't be the third rounder that they gave up, but more likely a fourth or fifth rounder, in addition to the sixth rounder that they still got from the Jets. So this is not a Saints giving away a third round pick for absolutely nothing at all. In my opinion, it's a win-win situation.
Right. And, one last thought on Teddy Bridgewater, and Emory, I would like to get your thought about this as well. He's still young. He had a devastating injury, correct? It looks like he's regained a little bit more of his mobility. And I watched the game from the other night. He still was in the pocket, but I don't know if he's fully mobile like he was back in his rookie days. Did you see anything different when you watched him on the field?
The funny part about that is, he's been gone for almost 2 years. So I've kind of forgotten what his mobility was like. But I think you're probably right as far as how he's moving. I think he's still getting acclimated to game speed. So playing in the preseason was huge for him. And I thought he got better in that regard with each and every time he was out there on the field. Now, again, I wasn't at their practices, so I wasn't able to see a lot more. But I wish he could have played in the last preseason game as well before getting traded, but I understand why they did it, because that definitely would have put the Jets in a tough situation to try to move him, because they would have pretty much had to cut him and he would have been a free agent. So I still think you're right. By him wearing that big brace on his leg, you could still, see he's favoring it a little bit. But he's been out there throwing on the run, evading pressure. He's gotten hit multiple times, so all looks good.
All right, good stuff.
Well, in addition to the new quarterback, the Saints still do have a handful of what we think is going to be some very tough roster decisions to make. Of course, they wrap up their preseason with a game tomorrow night against fellow NFC contender Los Angeles Rams. I wouldn't expect to see Drew Brees or any of the top starters pretty much at all this game. How about you guys? Is there anything that you guys need to see from either of these top units where you would think that Sean Payton would even put them on the field tomorrow night?
Well, the only question marks that I have, and Emory pretty much put that out there as well, is the fact that these wide receivers, as well as what's going to happen with these guys in the long term. Look, we know Michael Thomas. We know we have him, and we know the veteran presence we have in Ginn. But in my opinion, I think Traquan Smith has done far more than Ginn in this preseason to be elevated to number 2. That's just my opinion, right? The other guys like Austin Carr, we know that if you throw the ball in his vicinity, he's going to catch it. And I like that fact. Tommy Lee has done a very good job, a couple of dynamic plays here and there. I just don't know if the Tommy Lee project is going to be what we need to see in 2018. And, when you look at what the Saints are going to be faced with, the type of competition, the level of competition that we're going to be faced with as well, Cameron Meredith has really concerned me. And I know the guys have been saying different things about how he's practiced, but I have been concerned that he's been MIA in the past couple of preseason games. That's a major concern of mine. And as well as like you said, Emory, the tight end presence, oh my goodness, where have they been?
Tight ends have been in Green Bay when Jimmy Graham signed that deal with the Packers instead of coming back to New Orleans.
Don't get me wrong, Ben Watson. I'm sorry, Ben Watson's great, but I'm just still. Where have these guys been? And Emory, you brought up a good point of that. Go on, Bob. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's okay. I agree. I think at least on paper, there's no reason to believe that Ben Watson can't do this for another season. But if he can't, and Emory, you hit the nail on the head. Do any of us really think that Josh Hill or Dan Arnold or Human or John Phillips are any of them even close to a number 1 tight end? Whether the offense features them or not? My answer is no, and that continues to be a major concern for me. Probably the biggest concern about this Saints team as they head into the season opener.
Emory?
Yeah, I'm here.
What are your thoughts about these tight ends?
I mean, you guys pretty much summed it up. I just feel as though the Saints have to find ways to get better at that position. That's about as simple as I can put it.
I wonder, is there another potential trade, or would we be able to see somebody out there on the market, as a potential bubble guy or roster cut that may put them out on the free agent market? Have you heard anything out there, or do you know of anything that may be in the works?
I have no clue. It's tough to speculate until, guys get released after this 4th preseason game. But, you never know. Maybe they may surprise you. Maybe Ben Watson can be that guy. Maybe Josh Hill can put together a consistent season to become that number 2 player or something like that. So we'll see. But that's probably a glaring need right now for New Orleans.
I mean, there have been some mumblings, at least among some of the writers and analysts, especially that are close to the New Orleans Saints, that maybe, possibly, Ted Ginn Jr. could be a surprise roster cut, or probably more accurately, a trade candidate. Can you see that happening? I mean, has there been that much of a regression from Ginn, where the Saints coaches feel that they can, they already have the other pieces in place that they can move on from this veteran?
I mean, he's always been Ted Ginn. At the end of the day, it's not like, that. I ended last year. He made some plays for the Saints, which were great. But I mean, you saw them go out in free agency and get two receivers. One receiver and draft a receiver. So that tells you what they thought about Ted Ginn. I just feel as though the Saints missed an opportunity to upgrade the position and allow a team like the Denver Broncos to get both Cortland Sutton and Deshaun Hamilton. And now you're stuck in a situation where you don't have a tight end, or don't have don't have receivers that you can trust or go in the season with and feel comfortable with. So this is why you treat each draft pick like it's a valuable asset, because you can definitely turn around your depth chart pretty quickly. You see Denver have Demaryius Thomas and also Emmanuel Sanders, and they can get out their contracts next season, and which makes it easy for them because they now have Demaryius Thomas clone in Cortland Sutton, and a Emmanuel Sanders clone in Deshaun Hamilton, and they could easily step in and play and not miss a beat in their passing game. The Saints would even have a second Michael Thomas that they can look to say, okay, this is the guy. I know Drew Brees is going to throw passes to a lot of different targets, guys that catch football. Alvin Kamara may end up being the second leading receiver on the team. So we'll see. But I still believe that's where some of the questions are for the Saints.
Is it because let me ask you this, Emory. We really haven't had a really true speed receiver, down the field presence for a long time. I know Cooks was supposed to be that guy for us, and he did have some major plays. Last season, Ginn did have some very nice plays for the Saints as well. But I still, in my opinion, I hadn't seen the guy that caused a lot of separation. Is that what gives you a lot of pause?
Yeah, I look at and he's when they signed Meredith, he was supposed to be the speed guy, but he's coming off of a knee injury. Smith is supposed to be a speed guy. I wasn't as high on him coming out of UCF. You just don't really see the explosive, threatening speed. The Saints used to have that with Meacham. The Saints had it with Everett Henderson. They don't have that now. Michael Thomas is a possession receiver. So you really don't have that one guy that can really threaten downfield. So they're going to have to make do with the intermediate passing game. They're going to have to lean on their running game, which, quite honestly, is probably best for the Saints because their best depth is in the backfield.
Right. Speaking of the backfield, when Mark Ingram's suspension was announced, you brought up a very interesting topic regarding Jonathan Williams. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts when you heard about Mark Ingram's suspension and what you said about Jonathan Williams.
Well, Williams has been a really good running back. I was surprised he didn't stick in Buffalo. And when you look at what he brings to the table, he's a guy that's just like Mark Ingram as far as his vision, his footwork, his patience, and keeping the offense on pace. He's able to do that. And that just allows Alvin Kamara to not be in a situation where he's going to be asked to do something that he's probably not equipped to do, and that's be a full-time player. You want to keep him in a position where he's having a lot of success, and that's the role he's in now. That's why I think Jonathan Williams, to me, when they announced his suspension, I was like, okay, this is a chance for Williams to really play up to what his talent says he can play up to. And no Saints fans were talking about, they brought in Terrence West, they drafted Boston Scott, but the one guy, even Sean Payton brought it up in minicamp that, hey, don't forget about Jonathan Williams. And Jonathan Williams has proven his worth, I believe, well enough to where he can hold it down for the first 4 games until Ingram returns.
Good.
Now, that's a great point, and I remember Kyle and I talking about Williams, through the spring, and especially right after Ingram's suspension was announced as well. a lot of people don't realize how productive a back Williams was at Arkansas. Not only the vision and good feet that you talked about, but good explosiveness through the hole. You knew he wasn't going to be the starting back in Buffalo, not behind not with LaShawn McCoy there. But I'm like you. I was a little bit surprised that Buffalo moved on from him. But at the same time, extremely excited that the Saints had an opportunity to grab him and sort of stash him on the roster towards the end of last season. And he has not failed to disappoint at all throughout this preseason. Didn't have a great game against the Chargers last week, but none of the backs really did. Can you see? Let's assume that Jonathan Williams is going to be probably the number 3 back to step in and take split some of those kick carries with Alvin Kamara to start those first 4 games. Who, in your opinion, Emory, has established themselves as the other backs to round out that depth chart? Boston Scott, Shane Vereen, Trey Edmonds. Who are you going to give it to at this point?
I mean, you want to trust the young legs in Boston Scott to at least handle some kickoff return duties. Vereen is a lot like Kamara, so I think those 4 will be the guys until Ingram gets back. And once Ingram gets back, you'll probably see the Saints move one of those backs as far as like release them, and it probably would be Shane Vereen. But right now, I think all those guys make the team.
Oh, good. A lot of people in Louisiana would love to hear you say that about Boston Scott. What's your opinion on how well he's been doing on special teams?
Well, that's what he's probably drafted to do. He's a guy that's quick in spurts and just does a great job of finding open lanes. And if he can be a factor on special teams, that enhances his opportunity to make the squad, and it kind of puts the spotlight on Tommy Lewis. He's going to have to give up at least one of those duties, and I think Boston Scott has done well enough to where he can be a factor. And if he's done well enough, we'll find out at the end of this week. Maybe they cut Shane Vereen and Boston Scott along with Jonathan Williams and Kamara are the 3 backs they go into the season with.
Interesting.
Now, do you think that Brandon Tate is going to be the number 1 returner, or do you still think that there's a possibility that Boston Scott could overtake him in those duties?
You always want to upgrade. I still think there's a situation where that could happen. Guys I need guys that can do more than one thing. And right now, Scott can help you in the backfield and also as a returner. Right, as far as Tate is just a returner. You don't have room on your team for guys that just do one thing, especially when you're playing 46 on game day.
Good point.
Now, I'll tell you another thing. I mean, we mentioned the tight ends, and I think all 3 of us are in agreement that the tight end is a position to be more than a little bit concerned about. Are either one of you guys concerned about the Saints' depth along the offensive line? That's been a concern of mine over the last couple weeks watching these games. The starting 5 we know is among, if not the best in the league, but the reserves, when the reserves have got a chance to play really in all 3 of these preseason games, in my opinion, if you could attach one word to them, it would be at best inconsistent.
Well, I can tell you 2 concerns I have: Bushrod and Laribas. Laribas, I know he played a lot more at center against the Chargers, but at guard, he was getting twisted and turned against the Cardinals, as well as it just didn't seem like he was not effective. And he allowed a couple of quarterback pressures. I think it was 2 in a row at one time. So that really concerns me. As far as Bushrod is concerned, I think he has made a couple of mistakes, drew some penalties here and there. Kind of surprised of that from him, but he just hasn't been as consistent like Clemente was. And I know it's difficult to say, well, hey, this guy should be like Clemente, but think about it. Bushrod is a true vet in this league. So that's what concerned me about Bushrod. But I think right now these guys are really giving Laribas more of an opportunity than Bushrod to be able to make the team. That's just for as what I have seen thus far. Have you seen anything, Emory?
Not really. I've watched the Saints just a little bit. I haven't been able because I've been at Giants camp and Jets games and then Browns camp, so I haven't seen in depth, but just knowing what's on the roster right now, I think they're fine with some of the guys they have, and I wouldn't worry too much about the depth of the Saints offensive line.
Well, that's definitely a relief to a lot of Saints fans. And hey, listen, part of the reason, and I think we mentioned it with our guest John Hendricks last week too, they're trying so many different line combinations once those starters have a seat for the game. And with the offensive line, maybe more so than any other position in football, continuity is important. And when you're juggling line combinations, it is sometimes a little bit harder to get a fix on who's playing well and who's not. So, Emory, you bring up a great point. But I'd like to jump to the defensive side of the ball, especially and start with you, Emory. I know you up there in New York, I know you have a closer eye on the Giants organization, but like you said, you've been able to watch the Jets a little bit too. I want to ask you about Demario Davis. All of us were excited when the Saints inked him to that contract in the spring. And we know he's capable of playing any of the linebacker positions, but New Orleans has been using him a lot on the weak side. Is that where you see the best fit for Davis in this defense?
I think he can play all three, to be honest, and that just gets more talent on the field. I like A.J. Klein. You saw Manti Te'o essentially win the Saints the Redskin game with his big stuff on fourth down, and so that allows Anzalone to play spot duty, which could keep him healthy, which has been his biggest issue since college. And whatever you can get out of Kikaha health-wise is always a good thing. So I just think that him playing on the weak side allows A.J. Klein to get out there as Sam Backer and Manti Te'o in the middle of the defense. Now, you'll end up seeing more Klein and Davis regardless because more teams are running. Your base defense is basically a nickel defense anyway, so Davis and Klein will be your primary starters at linebacker with Manti Te'o coming in on obvious run situations based off what their scout report said. So I think the Saints are deep within the front seven. I love their D-line, their linebackers, and we know about their secondary. They are excellent, I think, on defense. This is probably the deepest Saints defense I've seen in quite some time.
Yeah, I don't think there's too many people that's going to disagree with you there. And you mentioned, and I think a lot of us would agree with you, that most teams, their base defense is closer to a traditional nickel package. Knowing already that Davis is going to have one of those linebacking spots and they're going to keep him on the field as much as possible, do you see Klein holding off Anzalone for that other primary linebacking job?
I think so because he's dependable and he can stay healthy. I just can't trust a guy that has never shown throughout his football career to stay healthy. And once you depend on him, we saw what happened last year, he gets hurt. So I think you have to put Klein out there. You want to use Anzalone in certain situations that you feel as though you have the advantage. And that way you can keep him healthy for a full season, which is important.
Do you believe that Craig Robinson should be a part of the starting rotation or could have a chance to become a part of the starting rotation?
I think that those three guys that we just talked about are strong, Klein, Te'o, and Davis. I think your backups are Robertson, Anzalone, and Kikaha. I think that's your core right there.
That's a lot of people have Kikaha, and you mentioned how deep the Saints defense is on all three levels, up front, linebacking core, and definitely in the secondary. A lot of people have had Kikaha among their roster cuts when we've been doing different 53-man roster projections. But you mentioned him a couple of times now. You seem pretty confident that he's going to end up as a key member of this final roster.
You need guys that can get after the quarterback, and he has proven, when healthy, that's one thing he definitely can do. And, you just hope that, again, a guy like that can stay healthy and stay out there. And if he can, he's going to be effective. So putting him in a situation where he's just like Anzalone, I think that's that's the key. And you want to keep multiple guys out there that can get to the quarterback, especially in this day and age.
Where do you see the veterans most at jeopardy of being cut along this New Orleans Saints team, at least from what you've seen and heard?
Well, from what I've seen, I still think when you look at the back end of the secondary, you look at some guys that are obviously not going to be on that roster, but I do like the recent pickup of Marcus Williams. I love how he takes the ball away. This is the guy who's been a ball hawk since his North Dakota State days, and he's bounced around. He played a lot with the Jets, played a lot with the Houston Texans, and just can't stick for some reason. But every time he's on the field, he finds a way to get the ball out of the offense's hands. So I think for the Saints, they got to find a way to keep him because he can play on the outside, he can play in the slot. It just allows you more playmakers out there on the field. And that's one thing the Saints have found themselves having an abundance of on defense is guys that can make plays. The D-line is stop power guys that can get after the quarterback. The linebacking core can do multiple things. Guys can play three positions. And in the secondary, you have guys that can swing between safety to corner to strong safety. You talk about a rookie named Charles Jamerson that can go from corner to safety. So you have versatile guys, you have playmakers. It just makes this defense very fun to watch coming up this season.
Well, yeah, definitely. Well, Em, I really do appreciate you taking time with me and Bob to be on with us. Tell the people how they can find you on social media and out there online.
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at FBallGamePlan, and make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel at youtube.com/footballgameplan. And for those that are college football fans, check out ESPN3 this Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, as I'll be the color commentator for the Morgan State-Towson game, which will be another great contest. It's the Battle of Greater Baltimore. So, again, that's ESPN3, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and check us out.
Okay. Emory, thank you so much, my friend.
I appreciate
thank
it.
You.
Thank
you so much, Emory. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully we can do this again soon.
Definitely. Pleasure all mine. Anytime.
All right. Thank you. That's Emory Hunt of Football Game Plan. Thank you, Em. Bob, good stuff from Emory there. Some good thoughts about the squad, especially the Kakaha situation. God, that's going to be interesting. Will we be able to see him back in black and gold or not? That was the biggest bubble guy, in my opinion, right now that had me scratching my head. Really, how does he fit into the whole scheme of things?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And every single person that we've talked to or have had a guest on the show or conversations between you and I on the show and in private, I think almost all of us have begrudgingly left Kikaha off the roster, and most of us say the same thing. If he could just stay healthy, he is a proven pass rusher and can get to the quarterback and can cause that ball, gets that ball out of the quarterback or the ball carrier's hands. He's just a playmaker when he's on the field. But Emory went the opposite direction. You're right. Instead of saying, I hate to leave the guy off of the roster because he's a playmaker, he puts the guy on his roster for that same reason. And he brought up such a great point. Pass rushers and disruptors up front are at such a premium. And if you could just keep the guy on the field, he will give you some good snaps. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. And you just feel a connection to him. And that's the only thing with him, and I think Sean Payton really likes him, especially how this kid has rebounded from those injuries time and time again. What's concerning to me is a fact that you look at guys like George Johnson, who has given the Saints some productivity last season as well as in preseason. He may be lost. You look at Kadeem Muhammad, man, he may be lost. Stallworth, who has really done a really good job, in my opinion, on that defensive line, putting some pressure on guys. He could be lost as well. And Bromley. So, I mean, we got guys who are possible contributors. I don't know if we can be able to stash all those guys on the practice squad, right? So, what really concerned me about Muhammad, man, from last season, he had, 4.5 sacks in preseason. Then when he got into a couple of the games, he only had like a couple of pressures, but not really being a impact player in this whole preseason, man. I thought for sure he was going to come in and just be truly disruptive. It hasn't translated well out on the field. So that's my concern with Muhammad, man. Maybe he just needs another year to marinate in on the practice squad.
No, and I thought the same thing that you did. I was really looking forward to seeing how well or how much Muhammad's game had progressed, and we just haven't seen it. It's not necessarily that he's played bad football. He's just been outplayed by a number of the different guys that we think that are going to be on this team. And, we've heard a number of our guests say it before, raise the question, you run down the list, George Johnson, Muhammad, Stallworth, Bromley inside, and even potentially Kikaha at linebacker, or the way Jaron Elliott played earlier in the preseason. In years past, they may have been starters on this Saints team, and now there's no place for them. That shows you how much the depth has come along. But at the same time, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I agree. What you've seen, Bob, is just they made a commitment. They raised the level of competition, which, people were questioning. They should have done that a long time ago, right? And once you raise the level of competition, you start to see the guys who are going to be the impact players that you need. It's same, we've been doing it on offense for many a year. You have talent come in, they raise up, they contribute. And I just think as of last year, when these young guys like Lattimore came in to be able to raise up, and when Crawley finally took reins of that starting position, you saw guys starting to be able to say, okay, all right, I can do it too. I can possibly come in and contribute as well. So you've always got to be able to bring in talent. And I used to say this on the Saints News Network's broadcast. My old VP would say it, when every day or every week I'm interviewing for your replacement. and she said that not to slight me, but to know that you never know what can happen. You never know if there's going to be a day when you come in and you choose to resign, or something unfortunate happens out there in the world, or it's just, hey, you stop producing. So it's the same thing in football, guys. You just don't know. Some guys can be distracted by family situations or personal situations or just their health out on the field. You always have to have somebody ready to plug into the position. That's it.
Yeah, there's no question, and we've heard Lyndon Stevens, our friends, who's fighting for a roster spot in the secondary. We've heard him say it too. Every week, every practice, he's not only fighting for a job on this team, but he's looking at it as a job interview for precisely the reasons that you just mentioned. If any of these guys don't make the Saints roster, there are 31 other teams looking for good players, and you hit the nail on the head when you said that you can't stash all these guys on the practice squad or on injured reserve. They are bound to be scooped up by another team. We just hope for fans of the New Orleans Saints, we hope that they don't become stars for another organization. But yeah, after getting to know some of these guys, we certainly root for them personally.
Look at the Saints secondary. This is a great example of it. Lattimore, Marcus Williams, Kurt Coleman, the other Marcus Williams, right? Ken Crawley, Patrick Robertson, Von Bell, Chris Banjo, Arthur Millette, Hardy, Jamerson. Then you have the young rookie Cameron Moore, and get this, where is Lyndon Stevenson? But more than that, where is P.J. Williams?
Yeah, and actually, I wanted to run down a list to you. We know that the Saints will always make a surprise, a roster cut or a roster move at the deadline that sort of surprises us all. So I wanted to run down a couple veterans. We talked about a Ted Ginn possibly being beaten out by an Austin Carr, or maybe Tyler Davis and maybe them moving along from him because of the play of Taylor Stallworth or Devereaux Henderson. Or how about the linebacking core? We've heard some mumblings that A.J. Klein might be moved earlier in the summer. All rumor mill that obviously didn't prove to be true. But we've talked about Kikaha. You just brought up a long list of talent in the secondary that could leave someone like a P.J. Williams or perhaps even an Arthur Millette, on the outside looking in. Along those veterans, established veterans, mind you, give me a couple names that you wouldn't be surprised, you wouldn't be totally shocked if the Saints made a move with them come roster cut time.
Okay, well, I have to respectfully disagree with Emory from this standpoint on Kakaha. Is the reason he has not really shown – he hasn't shown me anything when he's gotten onto the field in preseason. He's had a couple of pressures. He hasn't really gotten near the quarterback before the quarterback released the football. That concerned me. Okay. Another guy is Human at tight end. He hasn't been available, right? Availability equals guys producing. And when you're injured, you can't produce. P.J. Williams, bring him up again. Availability. You're not on the field. You're injured. You're not producing, right? So those are just three of the guys in my mind that I can see as a possibility. I would be shocked if Tyler Davison would be released, to be honest with you, for Stallworth. That would shock me. I think he still has done very, almost well. But what concerned me was still the Saints' run defense is a concern. Also, how the linebackers are helping to support them is a concern as well, man. So, I don't know, man. I always know that some things that we are not seeing, Bob, that those guys see inside the locker room that could really be a motivating force to kind of pull the trigger. Or it could be that little tipping force to tip a guy one way or the other, So everything we are thinking about is conjecture at this point. But I don't know. I'll say this as well. Nate Stupar, I love. Great guy. We know we have a guy that's solid on special teams. That's the only reason I think he stays. Other than that, I still have to say I don't know. Michael Ola, I don't know. Josh Laribus, man, I don't know, man. I really have questions about Laribus. I'll be honest with you. So those are just some of the guys that prominently stick out in my mind.
I'll tell you, and it's tough to disagree with anything that you said. And at the end of the day, we don't know. We're not Sean Payton and Mickey Loomis. I will say this. I had a 53-man roster projection through the Canal Street Chronicles. I think I did it right after the Arizona preseason game. And I left off Bushrod. I left off Davison. I left off Kikaha. I left off P.J. Williams. Fans, I'll tell you this. I'm not going to do another 53-man roster projection because I am now 50-50 on a lot of those moves. Because it's so tough to move on from a guy like Stupar, who has given you some nice snaps at linebacker during his career and is one of your team's better special teams players. Justin Hardy and Chris Banjo, they've contributed a little bit in the secondary last year, but they were definitely your best special teams players. It's so tough to move on from guys like that because we know how important special teams is to the outcome of a football game, and as a result, the final outcome of your season. I had I think my running back core, in addition to, of course, Ingram and Kamara, I did have Jonathan Williams and Boston Scott and Shane Vereen all making it, and like Emory suggested, kind of hinting that they would move on from a guy like Vereen when Ingram got back. But I'm beginning to think more and more that a guy like Ted Ginn could be trade bait over the weekend if the Saints could find any takers. Because it is such a guessing game, but when you see a guy like Austin Carr come out with the number one offensive unit, you know that the Saints coaches, that they want to see something very specific from this young man. Because they already know what they have in Michael Thomas, and we know why Traquan Smith and Cameron Meredith played so late into the game, because they wanted to, they wanted to take some hill to get some snaps with some of the top guys. So Austin Carr was out with the number ones for a reason, and it wasn't, it wasn't just for the fun of it. They wanted to see something very specific from this young man.
I'll be honest.
Taylor Stallworth. Go ahead.
Look, Bob, I'm sorry, man. I'll be honest with you. I think Carr, you need to keep him. He is the Lance Moore and the Willie Snead type of guy that you need on this team. That's just my opinion. I'm more concerned about Brandon Tate or Cameron Meredith being one of the options at wide receiver than Austin Carr.
Can you see Cameron Meredith? Can you see them moving on from him?
Yeah, there's always that possibility, man. I don't know if money may be an issue or plays a part in the decision to keep him or not. But like Sean Payton said, there's nothing written in chalk. I mean, there's nothing written in pen. Everything's written in chalk right now with this wide receiving core, right? I just don't. Austin Carr has shown me he can catch the ball. He runs very good routes. I just think he's a football player that you need to keep on the squad. That's just my opinion.
And like I said about a couple other points that you made, it's tough to see Carr play and disagree with you. The guy makes plays when he's out on the field. Very reminiscent of Lance Moore or even Willie Snead early in his Saints career. Very reminiscent of their style of play. And we know how a player like that can flourish. With in a Sean Payton type of offense with Drew Brees throwing him the football. My only question is that when you sit down and you try to, okay, they're going to keep this many players at this position and this is who it's going to be, and that many players at that position and this is who they're going to be. The question of the day is, how can you fit an Austin Carr into your roster? Because you're going to have to move on from somebody that has some sort of talent, and specifically in that position. Do you feel confident enough in a Boston Scott to keep him as your running back and primary kick returner that you can move on from a Brandon Tate? Because like Emory said earlier, he's not going to give you a whole lot at wide receiver. He's going to be your kick returner. I can't see, a lot of different people will disagree with me. I can't see the Saints keeping 6 receivers which would be what I think that they have to do to keep Carr and Tate and not move on from a guy with like Cameron Meredith or Ted Ginn.
Yeah, lately Boston has done very well fielding the football, right? In practice, he's done very well fielding the football. The first few weeks, he was spotty at best. Going into the first game of the season and our first couple of games of the season, I think coach is going to really want to see a veteran presence, I think that gives Brandon Tate more of an edge over Boston, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean that it's the best thing in my opinion, but I just think but we've seen these guys stop being as conservative as they once were. And I appreciate what I've seen, especially by pulling the trigger and getting Teddy Bridgewater, right? So there may be a possibility that he does gamble and go with Boston Scott.
It is entirely possible. And, we remember, too, fans, we also mentioned it on the show last week. With the NFL cut-down period down to now basically one sleep instead of two different cut-down dates during the preseason, you see a lot of teams making a ton of moves within that first week to 10 days after the initial roster cut-down. So when the Saints get down to their 53-man roster, come, I think the deadline is 4 o'clock on Saturday.
Yeah.
I wouldn't go writing any of those spots down, especially at the back end of the roster. Don't go writing them down on a piece of paper and pen, because you're going to go through a lot of paper. We even saw it last year. The Saints made, I think I tracked it earlier today as we were preparing for the show. The Saints made 12 roster moves between that last cut down period and game 2 of the regular season.
Yeah.
And that was very little of that had to do with injury. So it goes to show you that it's a constantly revolving door. Not only in New Orleans Saints organization, but throughout the NFL. All those guys have, and John Hendricks said it on our show last week, all these coaches have a big board. Not only, everybody knows about the big board going into the draft, but they have a big board of players throughout the current players throughout the NFL. And they are tracking to see who would they most be interested in should they become available. And when an instance like that arises, they have to move quickly. And of course, if your roster is already filled out and you bring in another guy from another team via free agency or perhaps even trade, you have to move somebody.
Yeah.
So it's a constant series of moving parts.
Yeah, and look what happened also today. I think that one transaction has been buried. Saints signed the wide receiver Tanner McEvoy, right?
Mm-hmm.
This guy, 6'6", like Brandon Coleman type features and everything. Remember a couple of years ago, he had that trick play where he threw a pass against the Saints, right? They've signed him today. They expect him to play tomorrow. So, that was a shocking move. Why bring in another wide receiver at this time? Because everything in this National Football League is always evolving. There's so much ebb and flow to this game, as well as the roster spots. It's going to be a change each week in this league, man. We bring in people. They have people for tryouts every Tuesday. They will sign, they'll cut. They sign, they cut. They put people on practice squad, off the squad. So that's to be expected, man. I just think these young guys who are on the bubble on tomorrow night got to show up. They've got to show up. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. And for a lot of them, that is their final chance to make at least the New Orleans Saints roster. So I do expect some good hard play because we said it earlier. I would be shocked to see any of the top players on the number one units for any length of time, if at all. So that gives the chances. That gives the chances for a lot of these guys that we're talking about tonight to not only make one final push for the Saints roster, but also a job audition through the rest of the league.
Right.
Remember, if a player gets cut, that's certainly not the end of the line. You take an example like James Harrison of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I believe he was cut 4 times, and at least once by the Steelers before he finally made the Steelers roster and forged what could be a Hall of Fame career. You look at even the New Orleans Saints, a guy like Pierre Thomas, undrafted in 2007, managed to push a 4th-round draft choice, Antonio Pittman, right off of the roster at running back.
Sure did.
Or Lance Moore or Willie Snead, who were cut by the Cleveland Browns. I think both of them by the Cleveland Browns, brought in by the Saints, and we know what kind of career that they had. Or even on the current roster, Art Millette was cut at the cut-down period last year, and when he was re-signed, he was on and off of the practice squad all year, and now he could have worked his way into the number 4 quarterback spot on this team. The young players that we're seeing tomorrow, even if they are cut on Friday or Saturday by New Orleans, don't think that this is going to be the last that we see of some of them.
Right, and don't think just because, like you said, there's a big board, people been watching what's going on, they're going to be watching those other rosters. Like you said, Bob, we may have some more changes to come in, especially on that defensive front, man. If we have a leaky performance against Tampa Bay in the run game, they're going to bring in some more help to be able to shore up that run game. Trust me.
Yeah, and we didn't talk about it. Well, you brought it up a couple times, but we didn't really expound a whole lot. The biggest problem the Saints had defensively last year. We're giving up big gains in the running game, especially early in contests. We have seen the same disturbing trend in all 3 preseason games this year. Now, the defense would shore up. Last year, the defense shored up as the games went along. But to open the game, you can't be giving up, 25 and 30 yards a pop against the opposing running game because you're going to be on your heels and behind on the scoreboard real quick. You have a tough schedule. You have a lot of tough playoff caliber teams on it. You don't want your offense taking the field down 3-0 or 7-0 every single game. That wears down the entire team, trust me.
Yeah, it sure does. And it's demoralizing, too. Think about it. If you are a defense, especially if you're playing at home and you can't stop the run, if you have a team just running the ball down your gut or in your face, that's demoralizing. So you don't want those type of situations to happen. That's why I was asking Emory his thoughts about Robertson. Does he have an opportunity to come in? Do we have an opportunity to find somebody out on the street who's going to bring in some athleticism and a little bit more speed? Anzalone, I love him. I think he's a great kid. Let's see how he progresses. But I still believe that we could be 1 or 2 spots away from an upgrade with a little bit more speed in the Saints linebacking core. That's just my opinion as well. So, I'm going to say something really tough. I believe that A.J. Klein is on the decline. Now, people are going to say, well, are you stupid? Did you see how he tackled that guy? I also watched his side-to-side, his lateral movement was not great. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that I'm right, but what I've seen thus far, those couple of games, I was concerned.
Yeah, and I'm choosing my words carefully, too, because it's tough to say, because A.J. Klein is a solid football player.
Yes, he is.
I agree with you. I do not believe he is a top-end linebacker. I think he's got decent instincts, but his athletic ability to get to the point that he identifies, in my opinion, is a little slower than what I wanted it to be. And that's why, when Emory brought up, the nickel defense and, the two linebackers likely being Demario Davis and A.J. Klein, on paper, I can absolutely see his point, and a lot of people would agree with that. I would like to see Anzalone take that role away from Klein, because with Anzalone on the field, I think the Saints defense is a lot more athletic. And Craig Robertson, and some people have pointed out, Craig Robertson's, the 40 time coming into the league, in 2012, I think was his first year, at the draft combine. He doesn't have a blazing 40 time. But you look at, when they strap on the pads, and you look at game speed, in my opinion, just passing the eye test, Robertson looks like the faster linebacker than what A.J. Klein does. And I don't know that I'm completely sold on Klein or even Manti Te'o. Definitely not Manti Te'o as an every down linebacker. So the Saints linebacking core still has a lot of questions that they need to answer, at least in my opinion.
Te'o and Klein could not stop the run. They couldn't do it against the Cardinals. They couldn't do it against the Chargers, right? I'm just putting it out there, guys. And I know I'm going to get some hate mail from it, but that is a problem, guys. You saw what the Jags did, went right down the field, just running the ball with Fournette. Why wouldn't the Tampa Bay Buccaneers test these guys early and often in the run game? Robertson, Anzalone, and Davis are your most athletic guys, and right now in this league, you need speed. In this league, you need speed. Oh, gosh, I sound like Cochran there. In this league, we need speed. Johnny Cochran has come to the building. But look, man, and Bob, I'm sorry to harp on one other thing, man. Look, I hope I'm wrong as well. I like Ted Ginn, but will he be our friend? Will Ted Ginn be our friend in 2018? I would just like to see him, and that's what was surprising to me when they kept him out there early on and often with Carr. You noticed that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did.
I'm thinking Sean
truthfully,
Payton
a month
is looking
ago,
at that as
I would
well.
have never considered. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm saying I'm with you. I think Sean Payton was looking at this. You're gonna have to show me something, Ted.
Yeah, and I keep coming back to what John said as a guest on our show last week. And I'm sorry, boss, if you're listening. I'm really not trying to kiss your butt. But he planted a seed in my head. 3 weeks, a month ago, I would have never dreamed that Ted Ginn would be left off of this roster. And it's not like John said, hey, look, I think Ted Ginn's going to be a cut. But he did plant that seed that, if he doesn't play well, don't be surprised if that's a potential shocker that the Saints pull on cut down weekend. And I've been thinking more and more about it, and I've been watching Traquan Smith, and I don't think there's any doubt that Smith is going to open the year as the number 2 wideout. And you look at someone like Meredith, assuming Meredith is healthy or on nearly 100% healthy, and that the team has confidence in him. And we've talked about Austin Carr. And how you really have a tough time leaving Carr off of this roster now. And if Brandon Tate is your number 1 kick returner, well, we just ran down 5 wide receivers. If they don't keep a 6th, what name didn't we mention? We didn't mention Ted Ginn Jr.
Look, man, I like Ted. and he did a great job last year. But I'm telling you, the effort, what I questioned, just in the games, not in practice, just in the game. But again, I could be wrong, could just be a little bit off. Again, and I think Sean Payton will keep him. That's what I'm going to say. I will go out on the limb and say I think he will keep him. But if somebody comes up and shows something different, or if they're able to acquire somebody who can be able to make an impact, somebody's got to go. And it's going to be very interesting who that person will be. And yeah, you made another good point, man. Made me think Meredith may be a casualty as well.
Yeah, and I look. I agree with you. I don't think, and I agree with John last week. I don't think that Sean Payton will make a move to get Ted Ginn or even Cam Meredith off of this roster, but it definitely plants a seed. And it gives you even more reason to pay close attention to what's going on the field tomorrow evening. When these young players are trying to take the spots away from the veterans, and it makes you think. And yours and my job in the forum that we have is to throw things out there like this. Not necessarily for, and I hate the term, but I'll use it anyway. Not necessarily for clickbait. But just for possibilities, if this happens, don't be completely surprised, because this is why it could happen. We're not saying it will. We're not even saying that we think it should, but we're just raising it as possibilities.
Yeah, just as a possibility. Yeah, that's all we can do. Well, Bob, I mean, we're broken down pretty much the whole roster. Other than the special teams guys, we know Morstead and Lutz will be mainstays, as well as the long snapper. But with the rest of the field out there, it's going to be interesting who we have in and out of the squad. But I just would like to see on that first Sunday us have the most dynamic and ready guys to be able to field the black and gold and come home with a W at home against Tampa Bay. That's all I'm caring about right now. And I'm leaving that up to Sean.
I don't really care who's on the 53-man roster as long as on September, and excuse me, I have to flip through my calendar. As long as on September 10th, the New Orleans Saints are 1-0, I don't care.
Yeah, we've got to be able to start out fast. You cannot overlook Cleveland. You cannot overlook the fact that we're going into a hostile Atlanta Falcons stadium, and we've got to be able to come away with wins. If we start out 3-0, that's a good sign for this team. If we start out 2-1, it has to be those first two games that we come in and take care of business. We know we're going to be up for a fight against the Atlanta Falcons, but this team has to be able to start fast this season.
Yeah, no question about it. Because we've talked more than a few times on this show about how tough, at least on paper. Now, sometimes contenders coming into the season don't turn out to be as good as what you thought they were going to be, or vice versa. But on paper, the back end of the Saints schedule is loaded with playoff teams or playoff caliber teams from last year, and not just teams that barely qualified. We're talking a gauntlet of Super Bowl contenders. So it'd be nice to have, the teams that you're supposed to beat, you need to beat. So that way you have those wins in your pocket when you get to the toughest part of your schedule.
Yeah. Guys, look, Highlander, there can only be one. There can only be one. And let's make sure in February next year it's going to be the New Orleans Saints. All right, Bob, good show tonight, man. Tell the people how they can be able to follow you on the web.
Well, before I do, a couple announcements. First of all, I know Kyle and I were advertising that Ms. Amy Duplessis would be our guest, one of our guests tonight as well. We do apologize, and Amy apologizes. Something came up at the last minute, and she regretfully couldn't join us. I promise everybody we will have Amy on again as soon as possible. We love her insight. And also next week is going to be our regular season kickoff show on the Bayou Blitz, our first annual regular season kickoff show. Same night, Wednesday night, only it's going to be an hour longer. We're going to start at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 7 o'clock Central. For our first hour, we're going to have our friends from the Under the Dome podcast, Sean Williams and Alan Ulrich, back to preview their own preseason opener or regular season opener, and get our own show kicked off. And then for the second hour, we are going to have a Saints legend, Saints Hall of Famer, the best kick returner in the team's history, and defensive back extraordinaire Tyrone Hughes will join us for the second hour of our show.
And New Orleans, you Mr. Hughes.
Yep. So we're really, really excited, and obviously as we get closer, Kyle and I are going to be putting up promos for the show. So start emailing us or texting us your questions or topics that you want us to cover for this big show. We're really excited about it. But in the meantime, you can follow me on Facebook or Twitter. On Facebook, I am Bob Rose, and Twitter, I am at BobbyR2613. My articles are, of course, written through the Canal Street Chronicles, and I'll be coming out tomorrow morning with a piece on specific things to watch during this Rams game. Kyle and I covered some of which tonight. But Canal Street Chronicles can be followed on Twitter at St. CSC or Canal Street Chronicles page on Facebook. And as I hope a lot of you know and have already joined, Kyle and I are running a Facebook group and page as well. On Facebook, the Bayou Blitz. So if you're not already part of it, please look us up. I think it's a really fun group. It seems to be growing, and everybody seems to enjoy it. A lot of good interaction. If you are a member of the Bayou Blitz Facebook group and you know people that do like our show or would like our show, please, by all means, add them. We're all friends and family members here, and we welcome everybody.
Definitely. Guys, and also do not forget, you can follow Barry Hurstis and all of his featured columns on www.saintsnewsnetwork.com. You can follow us online on Twitter at Saints News, Instagram at Saints News, and Facebook at Saints News. So, you want to hear more of me, Bob, as well as other people in the Who Dat Nation behind the mic, delivering the best podcasts in the nation. Forget all those other NFL teams. Go to saintspodcast.com and you can be able to hear it yourself. You have guys from those guys at the Who Dat Confessional with Deuce Wyndham, and you have those guys at Sean and Alan, those guys at Under the Dome. So go to saintspodcast.com, as well as you can listen to Mr. Rose and myself on the Bayou Blitz. So this is Kyle T. Mosley of Saints News Network with Mr. Bob Rose of the Bayou Blitz. Bob, have a good weekend, man, and we'll talk a little bit later, my friend.
You do the same. Been a pleasure as always, everyone, and have a great weekend.
Take care. Bye. Who dat?